and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good job.
We're going to open up with a word of prayer, so if you join me with prayer. Father God, we come before you this evening just giving thanks to you that you are a God who is at work in this nation and in this community and amongst your people. And so we ask that you would work in this situation, Father, that you would change hearts and minds, that you would help them to think with what's good for the community rather than think with what's good for this global world, Father, and that you would guide us and direct us even this evening. We commit this time to you, that your Spirit would be here, and that this message from these men who have come together tonight, Father, that you would bless them with a ready turn of thought, and that we would be educated on what we need to hear and understand, and that we, your people, would filter that with a biblical worldview, that we might have the conviction that we need to stand against the ungodliness that's coming into our community. Father, we praise you for giving us your only begotten Son, Jesus Christ, and it's to him alone that we seek glory tonight, and it's in his name that we pray. Amen.
I'd like to welcome everybody out again this evening. This was a little bigger turnout than what we originally expected, and we really appreciate that. Yeah. I originally said if we can get 50 to 75, maybe that would justify our speaker coming, so we've exceeded that, and I appreciate it. We know that many of you have heard the arguments of Dr. Clark and the Okefenokee Swamp Park Board of Trustees. And by coming here tonight, I believe you're showing an earnest effort to be objective by coming and listening, and we appreciate that. My name is Brooks Strickland, and I'm a part of a group of concerned citizens that have come to be known as the Americans for the Okefenokee. We have come to a knowledge after much study that the United Nations is an evil organization whose end goal is total world control, and that any affiliation with the UN or its subsidiaries, like UNESCO, would be detrimental to our country. We began studying the United Nations 4 years ago. We learned how it was formed to establish world control and how much of its affiliates, like UNESCO and the World Health Organization, served those overall ends through their specific roles. I told my friends that I was not sure how to introduce these truths to the public, but that if we kept learning, I believed God would open a door. Last August, a friend of mine, Ms. Deborah Giddens, she's the Ware GOP for the local Ware County chapter. She told me about an effort to make the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge a UNESCO World Heritage Site. I knew UNESCO was a part of the UN, and it didn't take long before I knew our door had opened. It didn't take going to Washington or even Atlanta. The problem had come to us. I called my pastor and mentor of nearly 20 years to tell him what was happening in the series of events that I believe had led up to this. I asked him, did he think this was a worthwhile cause to take up? If we could share this information that we had been learning with the public and they listen, could we stop it? He said yes, if the people listen. In all the years I knew him, he gave me his blessing on many occasions. This turned out to be his last, as he died 3 months later. Many of you know the pastor I'm talking about, Brother Bill Mullis. So in the spirit of what he said, I want to thank you again tonight for showing up to listen. It's not only these dark truths about the United Nations that motivate us to stop the UNESCO World Heritage Site. Our founding father, Thomas Jefferson, had a great quote. Many people have expressed this throughout the ages, but he said it best when he said, "Evil triumphs when good men do nothing." Think about that statement for a moment. It's conditional. Evil triumphs when or if good men do nothing. The inverse of that would have to be that evil does not triumph or evil is defeated when good men do something. I believe the deciding factor in whether or not the evils that plague our nation ultimately prevail doesn't depend on the evils themselves, but rather what good men and women decide to do in the face of those evils. Likewise, if our Okefenokee does come under the evil globalist influence of the United Nations, it will not be because of the actions of the United Nations so much as it would be because of the inaction of the good men and women of the Okefenokee region. And I'll say this too, the relationship between light and dark is very similar. If a room is light or if a room is dark, is it up to the light or is it up to the dark? If the light wants to be on, it disperses the dark. When you in order for dark to come in, the light switch has to be killed. So ultimately, it's up to light whether or not darkness comes in. And as I think about it, that's probably why Jesus put such a strong emphasis on not hiding your light under a bushel, but letting it shine and putting it in a high place so that all could see. I believe that light is the natural antidote to evil and to darkness. Here to shine more light on those evils of the United Nations and UNESCO is our special guest speaker. He's an award-winning international journalist whose assignments have put him on the doorstep of some of the UN's biggest international meetings. You've probably seen his work in national publications such as the New American Magazine and the Epoch Times. He's also a nationally syndicated radio host and author. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Mr. Alex Newman.
Thank you, Brooks, and thanks everybody for being here. It's an honor to be able to speak with you, and I want to start just sharing a little personal story. My grandpa, that you guys probably know, some people like him. He's one of those lifelong Republicans, and the election comes, and he doesn't have to research the candidates or the issues. Just Republican, 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 Republican. Some of you here, I'm sure, know people like that. And then 2020 comes along, and we find out he voted for Joe Biden. That's what we said. What in the world is going on here? So emergency family meeting, something is up. And we didn't have to talk long before we all agreed and recognized this never would have happened if Grandpa was still alive. And he lived in Georgia. In all seriousness, there's all kinds of evil going on in our country, and election fraud is one of those evils. So I was asked today to talk about UNESCO. And it's interesting because I have had a lot of experience with UNESCO. Education is my passion. I've been focused on education like a laser beam for 15 years. And it just so happens that the organization that wants to have a heritage site here is also the organization for the United Nations in charge of what they call education, which I think normal people probably wouldn't agree with that definition. But it's the UN Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. So I've got a lot of experience with UNESCO. And I'll tell you what, it is an incredibly evil organization. And the evil goes all the way back to the very beginning. I'm really going to focus on giving you guys a 50,000-foot view today rather than the nitty-gritty on all the World Heritage sites. I've got a little bit on that. But I want you to see what kind of organization UNESCO is. I want you to put this little local issue that affects you guys here in the broader global context of what these megalomaniacs are doing. And it is not good. So we start with this guy here. He was the first leader of UNESCO. His name was Julian Huxley. He was actually the brother of Aldous Huxley, who wrote the book Brave New World, which isn't what you think it is. And a really interesting guy. He was actually much more open than the UN typically is today about their desire to form a one-world government. Their motto was, we're going to build peace into the minds of men. In other words, we're going to brainwash your children, supposedly to avoid war. When you understand what they mean by peace they mean eliminate all opposition to our agenda, then it really starts to make sense what they're up to. He was also pretty open about what they were doing. He said, we want to unify the world under some sort of world government. And they even put out publications early on in their history, back in 1949, saying one of our main duties is to combat family attitudes and influence over the minds of children. And we'll spend a little bit of time on that so you guys can get an understanding of who these people are. Now, it's also interesting that Julian Huxley was the president of the British Humanist Association. We'll talk a little bit about what that means. Some of us have positive connotations with humanism. It's actually right out of the pit of hell. And then he was also the president of the British Eugenics Society. If you're not familiar with eugenics, that's part of the ideology that motivated Adolf Hitler. They believed that some people were better than other people. Some people were Untermenschen. If you were too dumb or too ugly or you didn't like who you were, then we wanted to eliminate you from the gene pool. Okay? They viewed humans kind of like we look at cattle. We want to breed better cattle, so we'll have better cows. And they thought of humans in that way. They thought if we could just selectively breed people, we'd improve the race. So that was who this guy was, and a really interesting choice to be the first guy to lead UNESCO, especially in the aftermath of World War II, where eugenics got such a bad smell from the Nazis, from the National Socialists. So pretty amazing that they chose this guy to put in charge. This was one of their posters back in the day, the British Eugenics Society. You got to release the stranglehold of hereditary disease and unfitness. And if they didn't like you, you were unfit. You shouldn't be having children. Okay. Now, this humanist religion, it is a religion, by the way, and the early inventors of this religion acknowledged that it was a religion. They came up with the Humanist Manifesto. And you can read this. They now have updated versions, so now you have to find Humanist Manifesto 1. That was the original one that was still in play when Julian Huxley was there. But the first tenet, this is word for word from their manifesto, religious humanists regard the universe as self-existing and not created. I mean, it's a free country. You can believe any kind of dumb thing you want to. I can't imagine where you'd find the faith to believe something so asinine, but it's a free country. You can believe that. But let's compare that for a moment with what God says. Right in the beginning, Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So clearly, this religion is not compatible with the truth. Now, it's not even compatible with the founding principles of our country. Okay? Our founding fathers didn't even think you had to consult your Bible for this. They said it was a self-evident truth that all men were created equal and that they were endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Well, the humanists, including Julian Huxley, the first leader of UNESCO, didn't believe that. How could you have God-given rights if there's no God? Don't be silly. Right? It's an oxymoron. You can't have a right from God if there is no God. I'm God. You're God. She's God. We can all be our own little gods. We can decide for ourselves what's right and wrong. Some of this should sound familiar. It's the oldest lie in the book, Genesis chapter 3. It's what Satan said, right? Ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. So isn't it interesting that the first leader of this organization that was supposed to brainwash our children was a member of a cult that believes the oldest lie in the book, that we are all our own little gods, because there is no real God. And of course, therefore, you have no God-given rights. Really interesting choice to put the leader of this cult in charge of the organization that was going to educate our children, supposedly. Now, if you keep reading the Humanist Manifesto, it's kind of like the Communist Manifesto in more ways than one. The humanists, they say they're firmly convinced that the existing acquisitive and profit-motive society has shown itself to be inadequate and that a radical change in methods, controls, and motives must be instituted. Now, if that doesn't sound like Karl Marx, I don't know what does. Got to get rid of the profit motive. That's bad. We need a radical change, don't we? They continue. And again, you can read all this as Humanist Manifesto 1. Anybody can read it. It says a socialized and cooperative economic order needs to be established so that we can have equitable distribution of the means of life. Think back to what did Karl Marx say? We have collective ownership of the means of production. It's the same thing stated in a slightly different way. So we've got a guy who believes the lie from Satan, who wants to institute a communist economic method, working to brainwash our kids, leading the organization that today wants to play a role in overseeing your local swamp. Isn't that cute? And the background gets even crazier. Now, there's a reason why both Donald Trump and Ronald Reagan got us out of this organization from hell. Okay? Two great American presidents. Now, Reagan, when he got us out, they blasted UNESCO. One of the things that UNESCO wanted to do that they were so upset about and that personally impacts me, they wanted to license journalists. Like we license doctors. They didn't think you ought to be able to write your opinion unless the government first gave you a license, a permission strip, right? Please, government, can I complain about what you're doing? So Ronald Reagan said, no, that's not a good idea. They also were openly advocating Soviet-style communistic policies that were literally run by members of the Communist Party from around the world. And that continues, by the way, till today. I'll show you that. And then 2 years after Reagan got us out, Margaret Thatcher's government followed suit. Here's what Reagan's administration said when we got out. They said, UNESCO has extraneously politicized virtually every subject it deals with. It has exhibited hostility toward the basic institutions of a free society, especially the free market and the free press, and has demonstrated unrestrained budgetary expansion. Kind of sounds like the Biden administration. In all seriousness, though, Ronald Reagan was right. There's no reason that American taxpayers ought to be sending our hard-earned money to an organization that is hostile to the basic institutions and principles of a free society. And there's certainly no reason why they ought to be involved in your swamp. Okay? Same thing with Donald Trump. Donald Trump got in, and I actually talked to a lot of the senior people in his administration while they were working on this, because, surprise, there were snakes in the administration that didn't want this to happen, very much including Nikki Haley. Oh, did I say that out loud? Anyways, the Trump administration said, no, this place is rife with anti-Semitism, extremism. We are not going to participate in this. They talked about the extreme politicization of everything, that it was a chronic embarrassment at this agency. And so the administration put out this statement. They said, just as we said in 1984, when President Reagan withdrew from UNESCO, U.S. taxpayers should no longer be on the hook to pay for policies that are hostile to our values and make a mockery of justice and common sense. Does that sound like somebody that belongs in Georgia? I mean, give me a break, right? This is outrageous. So this was my first real introduction to UNESCO. Let me show you this lady right here. Oh, boy, she hates me with such a passion. True story. She smeared me in all the Bulgarian media. So she, until recently, was actually the head of UNESCO. Her name is Irina Bokova. And surprise, she was a member of the Bulgarian Communist Party. This is a political party that ruled over a small nation, Bulgaria, about 10 million people, and in just a few decades managed to slaughter 250,000 innocent people. And she wasn't just some flunky. She wasn't just some secretary, some bureaucrat. She was the foreign minister of this mass murdering regime. So who else would you put in charge of UNESCO other than a mass murdering communist? By the way, her dad was on the Politburo of the Communist Party of Bulgaria. And like I said, she hates me with a passion. They were going to make her the next Secretary General of the UN, and we started digging into this. Like, what? Really? That's about the craziest idea I ever heard. So they had to settle for a socialist. They put in Antonio Guterres. True story. True story. He's a Socialist Party. He was actually the leader of the Socialist International. Traces its roots right back to Karl Marx, directly to Karl Marx. It's the largest alliance of socialist and communist parties in the world. So these are the kinds of people that they put in charge of not just UNESCO, but the UN more broadly. Now, while she was at the helm of UNESCO, if we have time later today, we'll talk about it, she created a new agency within UNESCO called the Mahatma Gandhi Institute for Education for Peace and Sustainable Development, MGIP for short. And so she put these two in charge. A little bit of background. This lady here, communist from a mass murdering communist regime. She was one of the leaders of the Soviet Kyrgyz Republic, and she was also the president of the Soviet National Commission on UNESCO. Who else would you put in charge of MGIP? Which, if we have time, we'll get to that. They're injecting social-emotional learning into classrooms all over the world. And by the way, you think we're going to stop UNESCO from coming into Georgia? They're here already. They're in the classrooms of every public school in this state and this country, and I will prove it to you. And the other guy they put in charge was this guy right here, Dr. Karan Singh. He was the co-chair of the World Commission on Spirituality. He was big into the New Age, one of the big proponents of a one-world religion. We got to unify all the religions. He says that ultimately is what religion is about. It's about unifying the whole world under this New Age religion. And a little not-so-fun fact, before taking over this UNESCO agency, he was actually the Minister of Family Planning in India during the regime of Indira Gandhi, where they rounded up millions and millions and millions of Indians and forcibly sterilized them to bring about eugenics. So nice people they find to put in charge. I mean, can't they find any normal people? And like, I promise I'm not being selective here. As we look at the cast of characters, there are no normal Americans involved in this. They're all commies, New Agers, Satanists, witches, and I'm not even kidding. So here's the current leader of UNESCO after Irina Bokova's term has expired and she was unable to get put in charge of the whole United Nations, sorry. They decided to put this lady in charge. She's the new Director General, Audrey Azoulay. How many are you going to be surprised when I say that she's a member of the Socialist Party? Literally, right? She was the culture minister in France for the socialist regime of François Hollande. And of course, you got to have at least a socialist running UNESCO. If you can't have a full-blown card-carrying communist, you got to at least have a socialist. Okay. But don't worry, the commies are still there. Here's the Deputy Director General, this guy right here, Xing Ku. And he is a card-carrying member of the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, the most murderous organization that has ever existed in the history of mankind. They've slaughtered 100 million of their own people. What do you think they'll do to you if they get the chance, right? And that doesn't even include the unborn babies that they've massacred in forced abortions. So that's who's the deputy director of UNESCO, the organization that wants to be deeper here in Georgia. Now, even their World Heritage Program has been plagued by, it's probably the least controversial of all their programs, and even the World Heritage Program has been plagued by controversy. This is actually an article that I wrote a couple years ago for the Epoch Times, now the fourth largest newspaper in America after the New York Slimes, the Washington Compost, and the Wall Street Journal. It's a good paper. And it was really interesting because some people sent me this report, and what they found was that the UN World Heritage Site program was, in the words of the people who wrote the report, complicit in the ongoing genocide of the Uyghur minority in Western China. Here's what they said in their report. It was from the Uyghur Human Rights Project. They said, in China, heritage is used as a soft tool of governance to control and manage history and to steer people's memories, sense of place, and identities in particular ways. When the management of heritage is used in tandem with the hard modes of governance currently in play in the Uyghur region, Western China, ones that states and international bodies have designated a form of genocide, then the UNESCO heritage system is complicit in those acts of genocide. Sounds like people that belong in Georgia, right? This is crazy, and we're just getting started, okay? So they do have a history. Even here in the United States, there are already, as you guys probably know, there are quite a number of World Heritage sites across the United States. One of them is Yellowstone. And UNESCO delegates actually declared that Yellowstone was going to be endangered. So they called for a protective buffer zone 150 miles in diameter around the park. Now, it's true what the apologists for this say. UNESCO is not going to come in here and govern your county. They're not going to come in here and dictate what happens yet. But when was the last time you guys saw a government program get smaller? Right. What was Reagan's law, right? The closest thing to eternal life is a government program. And you can add to that they are always usurping more and more power. As soon as they can, they'll grab more. And if you get mad, they'll take one step back, and then as soon as they can, they'll take 2 steps forward. So it's a matter of time. But this is what they do, the kind of stuff they do already. I actually pulled this right off of UNESCO's World Heritage Site program about buffer zones, and they've got a lot to say about this. There are clearly delineated areas outside of World Heritage property, adjacent to the boundaries, and they contribute to the protection, conservation, management, integrity, authenticity, and sustainability, we'll come back to that, and of the outstanding value of the property. And so buffer zones are not officially part of the World Heritage Site, but they are approved and formally recorded at the time they were proposed by the state party, which in this case would be the Biden regime. So when buffer zones are defined, it says they should be seen as an integral component of the state party's commitment to the protection, conservation, and management of the World Heritage property. So yeah, the U.S. government will still be involved, but hey, we want a big buffer zone, and we want some big changes. So the functions of the buffer zone, it says, should reflect the different types and levels of protection, conservation, and management needed to protect the attributes that sustain the outstanding universal value of the World Heritage property. And this one in particular, because it's a swamp and water flows in from various different areas, you can imagine that's going to be a big buffer zone. And that buffer zone is going to play a big role in the conservation of that property. They go on to say that buffer zones need to include sufficient areas immediately adjacent to protect the site from direct human encroachment and impacts of resource use outside of the nominated area. What kind of resource use? Mining, farming, logging, you name it. And this is not unique to Georgia, of course. This is all over the world where they do these things. Now, they took these down from the web. I understand that they became a little bit controversial, so they're not on their website anymore. You have to go deep back into the archives to find it. But they've got the operational guidelines for the implementations of the World Heritage Convention. This is a UNESCO document. And they said that in all cases, so as to maintain the objectivity of the evaluation process and to avoid possible embarrassment to those concerned, they're talking about the Biden regime here, the U.S. government, not your state. State parties should refrain from giving undue publicity to the fact that a property has been nominated for inscription into the World Heritage System. They don't want you to know. Okay, we don't want to give too much publicity. The locals might get uppity. They might put signs in front of their houses. Actually, the first little village we crossed through when we got into Georgia, there's a big, huge sign, keep the UN out of the swamp. I loved it. That was fantastic. And there's some signs in the back. I hope you'll take some if you think this is important. They went on to say, this is still from the same operational guidelines, participation of the local people in the nomination process is essential to make them feel a shared responsibility with the state party in the maintenance of the site. But it should not prejudice future decision-making by the committee. So we want you to feel like you're part of this, but we don't want you prejudicing the committee. So don't get to thinking that you're going to have too much influence over how all this works. Now, there's a lot of articles about this. You can find all these. This one's published in The Conversation. You can find it on the web. It's Explainer, what is the list of World Heritage in danger? So sometimes they pick World Heritage sites and they say, this one's in danger. Well, what happens when it's in danger? Well, normally, for a site to enter this list, a country, they talk about governments. The UN likes to talk about countries. What they're really talking about is governments, right? Kim Jong-un is not a country. But they said in some cases of urgent need, the committee can even inscribe a site immediately without the agreement of its country. Yeah, what if the swamp got endangered? Maybe there's no time to ask the Biden regime, although I suspect the Biden regime would be quite in line with what they wanted anyways. They say they can even allocate funds to respond to the threats, typically with the agreement of the country, but not necessarily. Okay. Here's another really important article. This is in the Pacific Standard. It's about what they did in Yellowstone. They said it's true that the World Heritage Committee can influence domestic land management decisions. By the way, this is a left-wing publication. The World Heritage Committee can influence domestic land management decisions, sometimes with unexpected consequences. Again, these are left-wingers who like this stuff. This isn't right-wing fanatics and Bible thumpers complaining about the evil UN. This is left-wingers admitting what we all need to know. So a prime example cited by Hazen, this occurred in Yellowstone, 1995. The Clinton administration requested that the UN come in and declare that this site was in danger. Why? Because they wanted to bypass all the local yokels. They didn't want to mine. They figured if the UN came in and said, hey, this is an area in danger, we got to stop this mine, then they could do it. And guess what? They did stop the mine. Now, the UN didn't technically come in and say, you can't do a mine, but by coming in and saying, hey, this is in danger now, you wouldn't want to jeopardize the heritage of all humanity, would you? What are you guys, some crazy rednecks? This is all of humanity's heritage. Okay? You can't endanger that. So, they also have now shifted their focus. Sustainability. How many are familiar with the buzzword sustainability? Sustainable development. It's all the rage when it comes to the United Abominations. We'll talk a little bit about it. I think the simplest way to actually understand it, and people are surprised when I say this until they start looking into it and realizing that I'm right. The simplest way to understand it is take everything God teaches in the Bible and flip it upside down. God said, thou shalt not steal. They believe that because resources are inequitably distributed, we have to redistribute them, which is just a very nice way of saying we're going to have to steal your stuff and give it to whoever we think ought to have it. Okay? They like to use words that sound less threatening. But so on November 19th of 2015, and we'll come back to this date, it's very important. That's when they came up with the Sustainable Development Goals. On November 19th, 2015, the UN General Assembly, the parties to the World Heritage Convention, adopted a policy on the integration of a sustainable development perspective into the process of World Heritage Convention. This is also right from their website. I pulled this off today, UNESCO World Heritage Convention, Culture 2030. Pulled this right from their website. The thematic indicators for culture and the 2030 agenda. It's a framework of thematic indicators whose purpose is to measure and monitor the progress of culture's enabling contribution to the national and local implementation of the goals and targets of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Now, this is really important. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. It's really important. I'll break that down for you in just a moment, so just hold that thought. This came from that same site right on UNESCO's web page. You make culture visible, you provide a thematic overview, build messages and advocacy, by which they mean propagandize people, lobby your legislators, lobby your Congress, understand trends and build knowledge, and then monitor global progress of culture in the SDGs. So the 2030 Agenda, which now is central to everything that the United Nations does. I believe I wrote the first article about this in the American media. There was a total blackout on this in the American media. Now, the whole rest of the world knows all about this. I travel around the world following the UN clown car. Every year I go to weird places to see what these clowns are up to. I was on the Arabian Peninsula a few months ago at the COP28 Climate Summit. Before that, I was in Egypt on the Sinai Peninsula for the COP27 Climate Summit. Going to Colombia next month for the UN Conference on Biodiversity. After that, I'll be in Azerbaijan. So I like to follow these people around and see what they're doing. But this is really important, this 2030 Agenda. When they adopted this in 2015, the head of the UN General Assembly, this guy here, Peter Thomas, he said the 2030 Agenda was the master plan for humanity. I imagine God had a really good chuckle about that. Right? Keep planning, see what happens. So that's their master plan for humanity. In their words, that's not me, that's their term. This is the master plan for humanity. Ban Ki-moon, who was the Secretary General of the UN at that time, he said it was the global declaration of interdependence. And don't think that wasn't a swipe at you. Right? They know our Declaration of Independence is the big obstacle in the path of their vision for the world order, in the path for their master plan for humanity. And so they make fun of us. They say, now we've got a global declaration of interdependence. In the same comments, he said the UN was the parliament of humanity. By the way, a parliament is a sovereign legislative body, normally elected, although nobody elected most of these clowns. So just to give you some perspective on the 2030 Agenda, I encourage you to read this. It's very short. You could probably, if you're a good reader, you could probably finish it in 20 minutes, at least 15 times. No one will be left behind. Okay? No one, and that includes all you great folks here in Georgia and your kids and your grandkids. And so you go to goal number 10, and they kind of give it away. Goal number 10, these are direct quotes. We've got to reduce inequality within and among countries. Remember what I said, the formula for sustainable development? So to do that, they say, it's only possible if wealth is shared, which means we're going to take your stuff and income inequality is addressed. And notice it's not just within countries anymore. It's not enough that they're just going to take your money to Washington, D.C. and then redistribute it to their friends, their cronies, their bankers, etc. Now it's got to be among countries. So now they're going to loot the American middle class, at least what's left of it, and give it to the kleptocrats who've impoverished and kept in poverty the third world. And this is right in the text of their agreement. Right? So wealth redistribution within countries, that's national socialism. That's not enough anymore. We now need international socialism. Straight from the text, they said they commit, every government on the planet agreed to this, we commit to making fundamental changes in the way that our societies produce and consume goods and services. And how do you suppose they're going to make changes to the way we produce and consume goods and services? Well, there's only one way to do it, the force of government, right? And that is exactly what they mean. Very much like Karl Marx said, the government should control the means of production, and then they'll control the allocation of the goods and services that result from the means of production that they control. They tried that in the Soviet Union. They tried that in China. They tried that in Vietnam. They're trying it right now in Cuba and Venezuela. Anybody thinks it's a good idea, I'll fly you to Cuba, come back in 6 months, tell us how it went. This is a really bad idea. Okay, we've seen this movie before over and over and over again. It always ends the same way. Concentration camps, gulags, starvation, shortages of basic goods, and an elite at the top that runs every aspect of your life. It's a really bad idea. And yet this is the master plan for humanity according to the UN. And you can read it, pull out your smartphone right now. Type in 2030 Agenda, it'll pop right up. For many years, it was actually my article that popped up, but then Google actually very proudly entered into a partnership with the United Nations, and now you can't find me or my articles. It's okay. We don't need Google to get the truth out. We're here, right? So you keep reading these 2030 Agenda. Every area of your life will fall under the control here. And of course, anything that might remotely impact a swamp, an ocean, a river, a tree will come under the jurisdiction here. We need sustainable agriculture, sustainable food production, sustainable management of water, sustainable consumption and production, sustainable farming so that we don't have marine pollution, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not just governments, right? I told you all the governments in the world agreed to the 2030 Agenda. 2015 at the UN General Assembly, every national government in the world, Barack Obama signed on our behalf, came together, and they all agreed, we're going to do this. This is what we need. But as Peter Drucker explained, the fake management guru, big globalist, he said if you really want to make a lasting change at the international level, you have to use a three-legged stool approach. And so the three legs of the stool, the first leg is governments, the public sector, he said. And so all the governments in the world agreed to the 2030 Agenda. The second leg of the stool, he said, was the business sector, the private sector. Well, 2019, the World Economic Forum. Anybody familiar with the World Economic Forum? Okay. If not, you should be. The Davos crowd, all the billionaires and the CEOs of all the Fortune 500 companies, they get together with their dictator buddies and they hobnob. So the World Economic Forum signed a strategic partnership with the United Nations. They became the strategic partner of the United Nations in bringing the business community of the world on board with the 2030 Agenda. This is their press release. I just took a screenshot right from the UN's website. There's the World Economic Forum's press release. World Economic Forum and UN signed strategic partnership framework, and it is to accelerate the implementation of the 2030 Sustainable Agenda. All the Fortune 500 companies are on board with this. There's a reason you haven't heard about this from your fake media. Now, the third leg of the stool, according to Peter Drucker, was religion. Now we're going to step on some toes. So I mentioned I was on the Sinai Peninsula just about a year and a half ago for the UN COP27 summit. And the UN released this handy human development report right before the summit started. And you can get this online. It's freely available. And they said that these evolutionary processes that resulted in the system of ethics and morality that we have today are no longer sustainable. We can't take proper care of Mother Earth as long as we cling to our guns and our Bible. So we need, they said, fundamental changes. We need people to act according to new moral codes. We're not just talking about redistributing your wealth here. We're not just talking about upending the way farmers farm. We're not just talking about upending the way fishermen fish. We're not talking about restructuring everything on the planet. We're talking even about your values and your ethics. So as part of this monstrosity, all these religious leaders from around the world came together. There was Muslims, there was Jews, there was Hindus. They flew in some pagans from the Amazon rainforest with the big feather dresses. There was evangelicals. There was Orthodox Christians. There were Catholic leaders, highest levels of the Vatican. And they walked up to the top of Mount Sinai, or what they claim is Mount Sinai. There's a debate about whether it's really Mount Sinai. We'll leave that for another day. But they walked up there, and they whipped out the new and apparently improved 10 Commandments. Yeah. That's a picture right there. That was their new 10 Commandments standing on the top of Mount Sinai. True story, absolutely true story. They did this weird ceremony and they kind of danced around and they apologized to their gods for their climate sins, their carbon dioxide emissions, the steak, the air travel. We're sorry. All I could think of was the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. So ridiculous. And then I ran into the organizers of this atrocity. Oh, after that, the guy smashed the tablets on the floor, ranted and raved about how the UN had to save us from global warming. And then I ran into the organizers of this thing at the UN summit down below. I said, hey, can I have an interview? Like, yeah, sure, great, that's wonderful. So I got them on camera for about 45 minutes talking about this stuff. And here is what one of the organizers, James Sternlick, CEO of the Peace Department, said. Oh, we need sound, guys, in the back. Oh. We had sound earlier. All right, I'll give them a minute. But it's really interesting what he says, right? Because God gave us the original 10 Commandments. So the UN and Friends has a new and improved 10 Commandments for us. And God gave us the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. Well, the UN and Friends, they're working on the new and improved covenant, the third covenant. Oh, you think it might be on my end here? Let me check. It could be. It is on my end. It started going through that thing. Sorry about that, guys. Technical difficulties. All right. Here we go. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and play that now. Let's see if it works. Oh.
All religions teach us to respect the creation that we have been given. And we've done kind of a terrible job of that. And so, with a new kind of 10 commandments of climate change, which are an addendum to, not a replacement for, the original 10 commandments, and a third covenant that we're some kind of working on between mankind and creation, that we would refocus on those elements of the teachings from across religions that point us in the direction of fixing the problems that we've created so that life can thrive on this planet and so that we can build that proverbial kingdom of heaven here on earth.
So there you heard it. Wow, we're going to build the kingdom of heaven here on earth with the new and improved 10 Commandments and the new covenant. Now, that sounds to me like blasphemy, to put it mildly. Right? This is outrageous. But these people talk like this. They didn't see anything strange with telling a journalist that we're working on a new covenant. So this is what it's like to go to these things. But you won't hear about this in your newspaper. You won't hear about this on Fox News. You won't hear about this in any of the major newspapers in America. So this whole globalist religion angle, all the religious leaders of the world, and they say all, came together in 2019 in Germany at an event called Religions for Peace. And they all agreed, all these religious leaders purporting to represent every religious believer on the planet, funded by George Soros, the Rockefellers, the Ford Foundation, the UN Foundation, various UN agencies, and our State Department. And they agreed that we are all going to urge our religious communities to invest their resources in alignment with the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, the 2030 Agenda. They said we commit to human development as set forth in the Sustainable Development Goals. So when they said the master plan for humanity, they weren't kidding. They've got the religions, they've got the businesses, and they've got the governments. The only ones in the dark is us, the suckers who are going to pay for it all. Right? Now this lady here, she was at the UN Climate Summit. Listen to this lady. She's the leader of Religions for Peace. She used to work at the UN Population Fund before taking this job. That's the agency in charge of reducing the number of people on planet Earth. True story. I'm sure they're not happy with me. I've got 6 and counting. But here she is talking about this Religions for Peace project, which, by the way, they all endorsed human development as set forth in the 2030 Agenda.
My name is Karam, and I have the privilege and the responsibility of serving a worldwide movement of interreligious institutions, organizations called Religions for Peace. In case you do not know it, we think of it as the United Nations of Religions. The United Nations has member states or governments. Religions for Peace has member religious institutions, all religious institutions, representing all the religions, representatives from
All religious institutions? Really? I called my pastor. I was like, Pastor, are we members of this thing? No. Oh, And there's actually a method to the madness. If you're not on board with this, you can't be a real religion. You're some sort of extremist. And we all hate extremists. So they're very serious about this, folks, and they won't let you find out until they think it's too late. Now, let's go back to the very beginning of this concept of sustainable development because it's directly applicable to what's going on here right now. The first Sustainable Development meeting was in Vancouver, Canada, the UN Conference on Human Settlements. They called it Habitat 1, 1976, and they came out with a final report. And I want to read you some excerpts from their final report. You can download this from the UN's website. They said that land cannot be treated as an ordinary asset controlled by individuals. Any property owners in here? We'll see for how much longer if these megalomaniacs get their way, right? And by the way, I also own property just on the other side of the border here. They went on to say, private land ownership is a principal instrument of accumulation and concentration of wealth, and therefore it contributes to social injustice. Therefore, public control of land use is indispensable. It is essential. They don't talk like this as openly anymore. This was their first agreement, and people got alarmed for obvious reasons. Wait, what? I can't own my own land? By the way, almost all of our wealth comes from the land, right? Our food, our minerals, our trees, all the fancy stuff that we have. Where do you think they got the resources to make those things? Came out of the land, right? So let's just look at the big picture here. The goal has always been a one-world system, and you can prove this. John Foster Dulles, he was the Secretary of State during the founding of the United Abominations. And he wrote in his book, War or Peace, this was published in 1950, that the UN represents not a final stage in the development of world order, but only a primitive stage. He says, therefore, its primary task is to create the conditions which will make possible a more highly developed organization. He went on to say that I've never seen any proposal made for collective security with teeth in it, or for world government, just come out and say it, world government, World Federation, which could not be carried out under the carried out by the United Nations or under the United Nations Charter. So clear back at the beginning, their vision was to make possible, he said, a more highly developed organization that would become a world government. And then they just started telling us openly. 1991, some of you probably remember this, the President of the United States went on TV and said, we're going to have a new world order. It's inevitable. There's nothing you can do to stop it. And he gives you a lot of details about what the new world order will look like. Listen.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
There's a lot to unpack in there. Start with the oxymoron, a credible United Nations. Really? Right, I know. That's the sad part, the uni party, right? But so he says, we need a world order in which the rule of law governs the conduct of nations. He's talking about a global legal system, which, by the way, is being built as we speak. The rule of law will govern the conduct of nations. He says we're going to use the UN's peacekeeping role. Anybody familiar with the UN's peacekeeping role? The goobers with the blue helmets, attack helicopters, machine guns, famous around the world for raping children. True story. 60,000 children raped by UN peace troops just in the last decade, according to the UN's own estimates. So if you ever see them around here, hide and prepare yourself. But anyways, we're going to use the UN's peacekeeping role, he said, to bring about the vision of the UN's founders. Anybody know anything about the UN's founders? Here's a couple of them. Joseph Stalin, representing the Soviet Union, he sent his foreign minister, Mr. Molotov, two of the worst mass-murdering barbarians and savages to ever walk on this planet. Then we sent this guy right here, Alger Hiss. They really liked him. They made him the chairman of the conference that wrote the UN Charter. Then they made him the first Secretary General of the UN. And then we threw him in prison. We found out he was a spy for Joseph Stalin. So that's who FDR thought would be good. Let's send this guy to represent the United States of America. And when the commies loved him, that should have been our first warning. Right? Now, I don't want to make this seem like just a Republican problem. Right? There's plenty of Democrats as well.
After 1989, President Bush said, and it's a phrase that I often use myself, that we needed a new world order.
The affirmative task we have now is to actually create a new world order.
So they're pretty open about it now, right? We need a new world order. Joe Biden, actually in 1992, Wall Street Journal, How I Learned to Love the New World Order, is published April 23rd. He says, we need to breathe life into the UN Charter. You wonder why they made him the puppet president of the United States. And of course, remember the formula for sustainable development. Whatever God teaches, flip it upside down. Whose idea was it to divide the world up into nations? It was God's idea. Deuteronomy 32. The Most High gave to the nations their inheritance. He divided mankind, fixed the borders of the peoples. Acts chapter 17, he made from one man every nation, determined allotted periods and even the boundaries of their dwelling place. Right? The whole story is in Genesis chapter 11, if you're interested. It was God's idea to divide mankind up into nations. And, full disclosure, I'm a big-time globalist. I can't wait for world government as soon as Jesus Christ is here to rule and reign over it. But in the meantime, this is madness. Now, if you want to know the character of the New World Order, we ought to ask one of the guys who has put more money into our political process than anybody else in history. His name is George Soros. Here he is, Financial Times interview, 2012. Listen.
So I think you need a new world order that China has to be part of the process of creating it, and they have to buy in. They have to own it the same way as, let's say, the United States owns the Washington Consensus, the current order.
All right, so the most murderous dictatorship in all of human history needs to own the New World Order in the same way that the United States owned the previous one, according to the guy who's funneling tens of millions of dollars into our political process. Anybody think that's a good idea? No, okay, good, I'm in the right place. That's crazy, okay? Now, UNESCO, believe it or not, is the most important tool in bringing this agenda about. Not through their World Heritage Program, that's ridiculous, it ought not be in existence, but through what they're doing on the education front. So Agenda 21, before there was 2030 agenda, there was Agenda 21. This was the agenda for the 21st century. Again, Bush
We've signed a
it.
climate convention on the importance of economic instruments and free markets. We're included in this mammoth Agenda 21 document.
Yeah. And CNN says it's a conspiracy theory. It's like, no, it's an international agreement. You can read it on the UN website. The communist leader in Congress also really likes this UN Agenda 21.
The Earth Summit Environmental Leadership Act, as this is known, presents us with an opportunity to follow up on the important work of the Earth Summit to develop its blueprint, Agenda 21, for global environmental action. HCON Res 353 outlines a comprehensive national strategy for sustainable development in accordance with the principles of Agenda 21.
All right, so clearly this is a big deal, right? Now, if you're not familiar with Agenda 21, we'll just use the UN summary. It's an array of actions intended to be implemented by every person on Earth. And they said it's going to require a profound reorientation of all human society, unlike anything the world has ever experienced. So where does UNESCO fit in? You go to chapter 36. Right? It's the same with Adolf Hitler. People think his Panzer divisions and his Luftwaffe was the key to his world conquest, 1,000-year Reich crazy plan. No. Brainwashing the kids was the key to the plan. Okay, so if you go to UN Agenda 21, Chapter 36, education is critical for sustainable development. It's indispensable for changing people's attitudes toward things like private property, morality, family, private property. It needs to be integrated into all disciplines, and it needs to include spiritual development. Remember our formula about sustainable development? This is UNESCO's book, Rescue Mission Planet Earth, a children's edition of Agenda 21. I've got a copy in my office, published by UNESCO. And remember the formula, right? This is one of the pages. It's a whole page image. You got, I think, some Hindu deities or something up here, and you see the little storks delivering all these babies, and the city down below is burning, and the deities are all upset. Oh, look at all these babies. It's terrible. And then on the page next to it, you see why the Hindu deities are so upset. Turns out the earth groans every time it registers another birth. What was God's very first commandment to mankind? Be fruitful and multiply. Thank you, right? So what does the UN teach our children through UNESCO? Oh, babies are bad for the planet. Mother Earth is groaning every time you have one of those carbon dioxide emitting children. They're very open about the fact that they want every child on the planet to learn from the same standards of learning. This was the Jomtien UN agreement in 1990. In 2000, they met in Dakar. They said changes in attitudes, values, and behavior are required. This is all in the purview of UNESCO. Oopsies. The Global Action Plan says it's got to shape the spirituality of children. Here we're back with Irina Bokova. She says every child, notice there's no exception for the homeschooled kids in Georgia, every child needs to have the right values to shape the future as responsible global citizens.
In 1990, the world met in Jomtien in Thailand. In 2000, it met in Dakar, Senegal, and adopted 6 education for all goals. Today, the world meets in Incheon, Republic of Korea, to renew this vision and chart a new course that builds on education.
So that's what they're doing. Now, if you read the UN's own documents about education for sustainable development, you almost can't make this stuff up. It's so ridiculous. I pulled this right off of their website. It's the UN Education for Sustainable Development Toolkit. Generally, more highly educated people who have higher incomes consume more resources than poorly educated people who tend to have lower incomes. In this case, more education increases the threat to sustainability. You think they want your kids to be smart? Right? They might get higher incomes. They might consume more resources. Right? They know very well what they're doing, and if you just look, they'll tell you what they're doing. Here's a board game UNESCO created for your children. It's the Agenda 2030 board game. Hey, kids, we're going to have some fun learning about the Sustainable Development Goals. Here's one of them. What's the best way to fight poverty? And if you have a brain, you'd say, well, free markets, private property rights, efficient markets, pricing mechanisms. What does the UN teach? Oh, no, you got to do what Robert Mugabe did to make Zimbabwe such a success. Got to share the wealth produced in the world, right? And if you don't believe them, go visit Cuba. See how well that works. So that is what they're teaching. They're bragging about what they're doing at this point. The U.S. government is fully on board. Here's Arnie Duncan, Secretary of Miseducation for 7 years, sitting next to the Chinese communist I mentioned, the Deputy Director of UNESCO. Listen.
It's an absolute honor to be here today with you this morning to address UNESCO. During the last 65 years, UNESCO has done so much to advance the cause of education. Education, as Nelson Mandela says, is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world.
All right, so we're going to quote a commie saying that education is the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world. And here we thought it was about teaching our kids how to read and write. No. And notice who he's sitting next to. We met him earlier. Qi Tang, the Chinese Communist Deputy Director of UNESCO. Okay?
Hi, I'm Arnie Duncan, U.S. Secretary of Education, and we are so honored that the UN Secretary General has designated the United States as a champion country of the UN Global Education First Initiative.
We're not just part of this, we're a champion country. I'm sure you're all very proud, right? So UNESCO is corrupting our youth in the most abhorrent, disgusting, degenerate ways imaginable. Ask yourself, is these the people you want in your backyard? This is their international technical guidance on sexuality education. You see UNESCO's logo right there at the top. There's the 2030 Agenda logo right next to it. You can download this. If you do, I suggest you have a barf bag handy. They want to teach 5-year-olds things that are so abhorrent and outrageous, I wouldn't tell them to my worst enemy. Little sampling. They want 5-year-olds to know about gender and homosexual parenting. They want 9-year-olds to know about things that we can't talk about. They want 12-year-olds to understand that sodomy is pleasurable. This is from the UNESCO document, by the way. This is affecting schools all over the world. Now, they also have what they call a World Core Curriculum. The guy who wrote it, Assistant Secretary General Robert Mueller, he's the father of global education, is what they call him. He said this needs to be taught to every child in every school in every country on the planet. Okay. So let's see what else he had to say. In the World Core Curriculum Teacher's Manual, and I have a copy of this, he's got a foreword in there. He signed it with his own hand. And he said the underlying philosophy upon which it's based is going to be found in the teachings of the books of Alice Bailey by the Tibetan teacher Javal Kul, which I think to most people is like, well, okay, what does that mean? We're not going to go too deep down that rabbit hole, but I'm going to give you a really strong hint. Alice Bailey was the founder of the Lucifer Publishing Company. Yeah, true story. It's still around. You can visit their website. It's called the Lucius Trust now because Lucifer Publishing was just a little bit too obvious. And then this Tibetan teacher. Who is the Tibetan teacher? Well, he's not Tibetan. He's not a teacher. In fact, he's not even a human being. Alice Bailey claimed to be communicating with what she called ascended masters, these spiritual entities that she was channeling that were teaching her about the glorious new age. As soon as we get rid of those Christians with their great heresy of separateness, then we'll have utopia. And so if the UNESCO's World Core Curriculum is based on the teachings of this lunatic and her demons, we ought to know what they said. What is it designed to do? Well, according to her book, I have her books, by the way. They're crazy. She has a book called Education in the New Age. She says world citizenship needs to be the goal of the enlightened with a world federation and a world brain. She says we need to fuse Marxism and neo-scholasticism, and we're going to get there using the chosen methods of John Dewey, the founding father of America's public school system. And you remember that Humanist Manifesto that we looked at the beginning? He was one of the lead brains behind it. Are you surprised? So, the Secretary General of the UN in 2015 telling you the purpose of education.
Education must do more than produce individuals who can read, write, and count. It must nurture global citizens who can rise to the challenges of the 21st century.
All right, so education needs to nurture global citizens. And we're running short on time, so this is probably the last point I'm going to make here. Because what you're hearing a lot about this UNESCO, the World Heritage thing, well, they're not going to come in and micromanage your county. What do you have to worry about? I mean, quit being such a whiny... Well, I'm going to show you how this stuff influences the classroom in the United States. So UNESCO is actually very proud of this. They said in 2015 that once we got started telling countries they needed to line up their national standards with our global standards, we went from 3 countries having national standards and national tests to over 101. In the U.S., we call it Common Core. So Bill Gates of Hell, back in 2004, he visited UNESCO headquarters in Paris. This is a picture of him at UNESCO headquarters. I had to borrow it from Getty Images, but hey, fair use if you're watching. Don't you dare. So anyways, they agreed, and Phyllis Schlafly, my late friend Phyllis Schlafly, got a copy of this agreement and posted it on the internet. It's crazy. They said they're going to create a global master curriculum, global master syllabus, global teacher training program, so all the teachers will brainwash the kids with the same garbage, and global technology to make it all possible. And by the way, they said Microsoft supports the objectives of UNESCO. So Bill Gates comes back. I call him Bill Gates of Hell. By the way, the gates of hell will never prevail against the church. And so he comes back and he starts pouring millions of dollars and then billions of dollars into this atrocity we call Common Core. Probably heard of Common Core. Regardless of what your political leaders may have told you, it's still here. I'm sorry, I hate to be the bearer of bad news. Don't shoot the messenger. Almost every Republican state rebranded it. It's the Indiana State Standards, and actually it's copy and pasted. 95% of Common Core is the Indiana State Standards. They lied to us, as they always do. But then they bought advertisements. Bill Gates and his friends bought advertisements to tell you how awesome Common Core was going to be. They paid money for you to see this on your TV. Here's one of their ads.
Up until now, it's been pretty hard to tell how well kids are competing in school and how well they're going to do when they get out of school. Is a girl in your neighborhood being taught as much as her friend over in the next one? Is a graduating senior in, say, St. Louis as prepared to get a job as the graduate in Shanghai? Well, it turns out the answer to both of these questions is no. Because for years, states have been setting different standards for what students should know and be able to do at each grade level. What we really need are clear goals. That's where the Common Core state standards come in. The standards are consistent from school to school, and they match up against international standards too.
They match up against international standards too. So you got Seattle, Chicago, Shanghai, and Paris. They're proud of the fact that Common Core is lining up our education system with the international standards. They say they bought ads so that you would know it. Okay, so we won't go through all this, no time. But UNESCO is, suffice to say, a really bad organization, and it's true. You know, somebody could say, well, UNESCO isn't meddling in your school. There's no UNESCO agent coming to check on your school board to make sure. That's true. There is no UNESCO agent coming to my school board and demanding that I put something in there. But guess what? The influence of UNESCO is felt in every public school classroom in this country without exception. In the standards, in the curricula, in the book choices, in the philosophy being taught, in the worldview being taught. So if your swamp is declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site, you probably won't have blue-helmeted, gun-toting, child-raping UN troops outside your swamp anytime in the very near future. But the influence will be there, and these are not the kind of people you want to get involved with for the reasons I just shared. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. We could go on and on. I told you I had a lot of experience with UNESCO. They are wicked. And when I put on that first slide there, tentacle from the plot from hell, I'm not even being facetious. So what do we do? Well, the great Chinese military strategist Sun Tzu said, if you know yourself and you know your enemy, you're going to win every single battle. And that's bad news for Americans because we don't know ourselves and we don't know our enemy. So we're going to lose every single battle, he says. And unfortunately, that is us, right? Americans today don't know the Constitution. They don't know the Declaration of Independence. They don't know our history. They don't even know who the enemy is, right? So we need to understand these things. I've got a couple resources in the back. I did a book on the enemy, deep state, the invisible government behind the scenes. We've got a whole chapter dealing with this UN Sustainable Development, UNESCO nonsense. We are in a war. Not because we want to be, but because a war has been declared on us. It is not a shooting war. It is a spiritual war. As the Apostle Paul says in Ephesians 6, we're up against not flesh and blood, but powers, principalities, spiritual wickedness in high places. And as anybody who's been in the military will tell you, if you go to war and you don't have good intelligence, you might as well just raise the white flag or go home because you're done. So we need to have good information. I would encourage you in the strongest possible terms, find good news sources. Big tech is making it harder and harder to find. If you're not yet subscribed to the New American Magazine, you should be. Talk to my friend Arthur in the back. He can get you signed up. This is a great magazine. The Epic Times, good magazine, good newspaper as well. My personal website, libertysentinel.org. You can sign up for my newsletter. It's free. Comes out twice a week. It's libertysentinel.org. I've got a show that I do 3 times a week on Frank's Speech. I've got a show that I do twice a week on General Michael Flynn's Patriot TV. I do want to encourage you to join the John Birch Society. It's the only organization that for over 60 years has been fighting this very same battle that has now come to your backyard. And they're not just saying, let's reform the UN. That's like saying, I want to reform my cancer. Right? What kind of ridiculous thing is that? You want to get rid of the cancer. So the John Birch Society has been fighting to get us out of the United Nations and UNESCO and all the tentacles. By the way, there's a great bill to do that right now in Congress. It's called the Defund Act, introduced by Senator Mike Lee. It's a great bill. One of your greatest congressmen of all time, Larry McDonald, who was the chairman, and he was a Democrat back before Democrats went totally bat poop crazy. This was back in the 80s. The Soviet Union shot his airplane down. He consistently introduced these bills to get us out of the UN, et cetera. So the John Birch Society is named after Captain John Birch, who was a Baptist missionary from Georgia, incidentally. Went to China to preach the gospel, save souls, and the war broke out. He joined military intelligence and served his country. And then he was murdered by Chinese communists. So we say he was the first American victim killed in the Cold War. We've got chapters all over the country. In fact, there are some chapter leaders right here. And Arthur is your coordinator for this area. He's wearing the blue coat in the back. Definitely talk to him. Definitely sign up. I mean, the reason we still have the freedom to do this is because for over 60 years, members of the John Birch Society have been quietly working to protect your freedom. And they don't get pats on the back from the fake media. In fact, they get demonized by the fake media, just like they did with Trump, just like they'll do with any of you if you stand up against this evil. But it's because of these folks and God that we still have our freedom today. So join up. We need people rowing in the boat, not just enjoying the freedom sitting in the boat. We need to obey our Constitution. And just a few scriptures, right? Because I know one of the big arguments you're hearing is, you're going to get more money. More tourists will come to visit your swamp if you just sign up and get in bed with the UN. Well, you might quibble with the applicability of this scripture. But what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? Right? You might get a little bit of extra tourism dollars, but you're going to lose a whole lot with it. And frankly, I'm not sure it's going to bring in all that much extra tourism revenue. So, this has been my motto as a journalist since I came to know the Lord in college, and it is directly applicable to what we're doing here. The Apostle Paul says in Ephesians 5, have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them or expose them. Now, if the stuff I shared with you today about this vile organization called UNESCO is not unfruitful works of darkness, if exposing children to this perversion is not unfruitful works of darkness, I don't know what is. Do we want to have fellowship with them? Do we want them in our backyard? No, of course not, right? And then last but not least, our Lord is quoted twice in the Gospels, in Luke and in Matthew. He says, he that is not with me is against me. Irina Bokova, is she with Christ? The UNESCO as an institution, the guy who wrote the UNESCO's World Core Curriculum, who says it's based on the teachings of the founder of the Lucifer Publishing Company, are these people with Christ? I think the answer is self-evidently no, and that leaves one option. Okay, so we'll leave it at that. Thanks, guys. God bless you, and I think we're doing a panel discussion now, so if the panelists would come on up, we'll go ahead and do that. Thank you guys so much, and God bless you.
Yeah, you're on the panel too. We ain't gonna let you get off that easy. All right. Once again, thanks everybody for being here, and it's been an honor to go back in there and grab more and more chairs to seat everybody, and we will grab more if we need so. We still have a lot in the front. But at this time, we're going to have a Q&A. We already have some questions that's been submitted on the forms in the back, and we're going to read those first. And if you would like to ask a question that's come up, that's on your mind, we're going to form a little line, and you don't have to stand in line the whole time, but as you see the line getting smaller and you have a question, jump in there, and we'll give you the mic and let you ask your question. At this time, I'm going to introduce our panelists. Of course, we have our speaker tonight, Alex Newman. He is here to answer your questions. And he also made reference to Mr. Arthur Hampton here with the John Birch Society. He is down from South Carolina, and he's got a lot of cool books and T-shirts and everything in the back, so please see him before you leave. And then we have our very own Hampton Ammons. He's one of our local farmers here, and a great guy, very knowledgeable. He's the one who does most of our articles on the Americans for the Okefenokee Facebook page. Super knowledgeable. He knows a lot. And yeah. And then we have Drew Jones, who's a county commissioner down in Charlton County, and he's getting a lot of good publicity for us down in Charlton County, and he's really trying to get the bottom half of the Okefenokee stirred up and fight against this. So at this time, we're going to go ahead and start with our questions. Thanks everybody again for your questions. And do we have that list, or you got them? I'm going to pass it to you.
All right, before I ask the questions, I wanted to show y'all some things that's in the back there. We talked an awful lot about the UN, and we have this book back here, The UN Exposed by William F. Jasper. It's a really good book that exposes what the UN is doing, trying to do, some of their goals. And if you understand what they're trying to do, you can understand how they're inching and inching and inching that way. Some other resources that we have, 10 reasons why the U.S. should get out of the UN. It's a free pamphlet in the back there. You can see my chapter leader, Dennis Stanfield, who's a chapter leader in Glenville, which is not too far away from here. The other one is, Alex talked about this one. How does Agenda 2030 affect you? This is another free pamphlet that we have in the back, a resource, if you will. It's free in the back there. Just talked to Dennis about that, and that's some of the stuff that we offer. The other thing, we talked about sustainable development. And so this is a book written by Tom DeWeese called Sustainable. And so it goes into an in-depth thing about the sustainability and carbon neutrality. Now, Alex Newman mentioned this book, and I'm sure you can talk to his son to buy some books back there from him. And I'm sure if you ask him while he's here, he'll sign it for you if you purchase a book from him. Is The Deep State, the Invisible Government Behind the Scenes. He talked about it earlier. But my favorite part about this book is actually the appendix. It has the 2019 list of CFR council members. And if you look in the A's, there's a lady by the name of Stacey Abrams. Do y'all know who that is? Oh, yeah. And so there's a lot of interesting folks in here that you can look through and actually see who is a member of the Council of Foreign Relations. Now, Alex also talked about UNESCO indoctrinating our children. When did this book come out? This book, a couple months ago. This is fresh off the press, I guess you could say, Indoctrinating Our Children. And this one was actually, was it endorsed by Kirk Cameron? This is a really good one, just fresh off the press. Check this one out. And also, he's got another one. What was it? Crimes Against the Educators. Crimes of the Educators, which is another good book as well that goes to the history of how they did bad things to our children. And so, without further ado, we're going to ask some questions here. So the first question is, describe the scope of youth education that UNESCO uses to impact our youth/schools, especially in areas surrounding a World Heritage Site?
I can answer briefly. In the operational guidelines for the implementation of the World Heritage Convention, I think it's around paragraph 130. There are instances where it specifically states that educational materials will be provided to local schools under certain conditions. A lot of stuff dealing with the UNESCO and their local involvement is you have to spend hours to find the specifics, as UNESCO influences our government, and our government is the ones that implement those actions. So when we see these actions, we're seeing what our government is doing to us by the influence of UNESCO. That's about the best that I can personally answer it at this time. I'm studying all the time, trying to find as much information as I can.
So virtually every UN agenda, project, policy of any significance comes attached with exactly that kind of language. We need to target children in public schools to educate them on these things. And this is true across the board, not just on World Heritage Sites. It's true on everything. Real obvious example, in 2013, I looked at the UN Food and Agriculture Organization's document on how they were going to convince people to eat bugs. And I know that sounds pretty disgusting. And nobody even believed it when I wrote the article. It was UN Let Them Eat Bugs, 2013. Well, one of the key things was we're going to go into the public schools, we're going to give them training materials, we're going to put this stuff in the textbooks, we'll work with the textbook publishers, we'll work with governments and accrediting agencies, and we'll get this shoved in there. And what do you know? All across the United States right now, they're including my home state of Florida right now, which people think, and there's this myth that we have some educational utopia down there. We don't. They're teaching kids about the alleged environmental benefits of eating bugs. So this is a key part of what the UN does. They don't do any major policy initiative without that. And as you guys saw from the UNESCO's own documents and the 2030 Agenda and Agenda 21, they consider education to be the essential mechanism through which values, attitudes, and beliefs can be changed. So it applies to the World Heritage Sites, and it applies to every other area of life.
All right, so our next question is, who and how is the final decision to submit our swamp to UNESCO determined? Is this based on we the people or a private gain for the elite?
From the understanding that I have so far, there's a partnership between the Okefenokee Swamp Park, Inc. and the National Wildlife Refuge as they do this nomination process. And then it goes to the Department of the Interior, which then goes to UNESCO committees. And it's the Department of the Interior that has it's actually an unconstitutional power that they have to make these agreements through foreign affairs. But that is who is actually doing it, is the Department of the Interior after it leaves the initial process that is completed locally.
Yeah, I'd like to add, so early on in this discussion, they came to the county commission, they told us if the public did not want it, it would not occur. And recently I've asked by what mechanism, I said, are y'all going to send a panel or, gauge public interest? And they said, well, we'll get back to you. And after several months, I continued to follow up, and they said there will be delegates of some type that come and talk to essentially constituents, but how they choose who they talk to, I don't know. The whole process is so obscure. As you've seen, we've asked, Dr. Clark and Michael Lusk, even Buddy Carter, a lot of questions about it, and the majority of the time they say we do not know, and they're unsure. So if you can't, get answers to your questions now, and if it ever is nominated, and we have a problem, who do we seek? You can go to Atlanta now, or you can go to D.C. and talk to a legislator about a problem and seek solutions, but we don't even know who we're engaging with. So that's the real problem. Those documents on that wall, near and dear to my heart. Revolutionary War was to dissociate ourselves from adversarial nations, and essentially this is an international treaty that undermines a lot of that. So we're signing on voluntarily to things that dissociate us from all those freedoms on that wall that many people fought for before. And if you don't know, the best thing to do is not do it. And this is an entangling alliance that I see very little, if any, benefit from. So I kind of departed from the question, but they did say there would be some delegates or a panel of some type coming to the community at some point. Now, who they choose, who they talk to, I do not know. But they told us if the public didn't want it, it would not occur, but they backed off of that. So we need to continue to follow up and ask the Swamp Park board members, because I feel like public interest in this subject is increasing. A lot of people have these questions, so we need to ask the Swamp Park board members and Dr. Clark, whoever may be in control. Again, we've asked that. Who's in control of this decision? They don't really answer that. So we need to ask those questions, continue to pressure them, and seek answers.
Oh, the gentleman here said Tom DeWeese talks about that very issue in the book, Sustainable. And I would just, great answers. What I would just add to that is whenever you have a process that is deliberately confusing and opaque like this, you need to be very concerned. What are they hiding? Why isn't this transparent? Why isn't it easy to understand? It's always the same thing. They've got something to hide.
One thing I want you to cover with that, there was a question put on the election ballot in May asking if we wanted to be a part of this. There were 78% of the citizens of Ware County voted no. That ought to be a resounding answer for everyone involved. To know it's not working.
You should repeat that because I don't think anybody back heard it.
Say it again.
On the Ware County election ballot back in May, there was a question number 11. Should the Wildlife Refuge become a member of a UNESCO World Site Heritage Site? 78% of the voters that went to the polls that day said no. I don't even know why they're still pursuing it, but they need to stop.
All right, another question is what is our state rep doing about this, or why are they not doing anything about this? That's a true question.
So again, this is an obscure answer, so I don't really know. But I will say that Tennessee, Louisiana, Alabama have all passed state resolutions that basically said that United Nations has no jurisdiction in their state. So it says that, private property rights, will not be affected by any UN, declaration or treaty. So again, if it's imposed by the federal government, I don't know that really does anything. In Charlton County, we passed something similar, but again, that's it would be likely federal, whether it be the education or land use policy or anything, it's likely come from the federal level. So I don't know that on the state level we can do anything other than continue to make people aware. I think on the state level they need to have conversations about protecting private property rights, protecting our children in schools. Regardless, there are people at the state level that can find those solutions if awareness is brought. The majority of the people, once you talk to them about these problems, they say we need to find solutions. There are probably people in this room that have relationships with their legislators, and they say, hey, this is a real issue, let's address this. And those address, there's ways to address it. But regardless, I think that it's a problem that, bringing about awareness, and Brooks and I, talk daily about this, regardless of whether or not we as individual citizens can do anything, talking to your neighbor, talking to your legislator on every level. And we've asked the refuge manager, we said, if the public does not want this, how do we stop it? They don't even have an answer. And so it's, like you said, it's an obscure process, and things about educating your neighbor, talking to your legislator on every single level. Yep, absolutely. So talk to your legislators. I think we need to, bring about awareness to our House members. We've talked to Buddy Carter numerous times about this, and on the state level, we probably need to introduce some legislation in the next session to protect, these liberties and freedoms that could be, affected by treaties that circumvent the Constitution. Again, I don't know how to do it, but there are people in this room that do.
Last week, they said they don't put this
They don't vote on it, so they just institute what they have.
Yes, it sounds like they really don't care what we think. That's right. And so that's why the purpose of this forum, was basically to educate the public and bring about awareness and talk to legislators who maybe can talk to somebody, and maybe there's a connection where change can be had.
I just want to say something. Most of those documents there, they tell us the federal government should be very, very small. State and local should be big. The only time the federal government should be big is in terms of finance, dealing with goods and services with other countries, commerce, and then in times of war. In times of peace, federal government should be very little. We have been dumb sheep, and we've allowed so-called leaders, they're not our leaders, they're our public servants, to call the shots for too long. We need to remind them who they are and what they are.
I've said several times, so there was a bill that either passed or was proposed this year that, made it where the adversarial ownership of agricultural land, due to supply chain issues and all. So there's either, the bill either passed or was proposed, but with this, they don't have to own it if they can control it. So adversarial nations, China having as many board seats as anybody, can control our, agricultural land, timberland, our natural resources. They don't have to own it if they can control it. So that bill, while it may be fruitful, this is a way to circumvent that bill that prevented adversarial ownership of agricultural land.
Can you hear me? You said about making contacts with your local officials and state officials. I've called my representative in Washington several times on several issues, and to this day I still have not received a response, an email, or a call. I've literally sent emails to Buddy Carter about different issues, no response. So I think maybe us as residents of the community in the area affected should start letting him know, sending him letters from the commissioners, from the different political groups, tell them we don't want this, and if this continues to push, maybe it's time that we replace you. Because they're not doing anything for us. We're paying for their salary, and they're not giving us anything in return.
So
I did 27 years in the military. I did 20 years with the fire department, and I've seen how the system works. It's failing for us in the military and in civilian life.
Absolutely agree. So Representative Buddy Carter came to Folkestone. We had a forum. About half of this crowd was here, and so we continued to tell him these same concerns, and these concerns, or actually a couple of people spoke, and Buddy Carter said, I think y'all need to go home and do your homework. We ended up saying, no, we're here because we did our homework, and we continue to educate him. And I think most people just not aware. It sounds, Michael Luss and Dr. Clark say it's just an award, but it's so much more than an award. I said, you're really trading notoriety for sovereignty. And it's so much more than an award. But regardless, at that meeting, somebody there said, stand up if you're for this, and nobody did. I think Representative Carter's aide maybe even totally agree with us, but I think, he was probably approached by some of these globalists at some of these global events, and it seems, harmless and noble at first, and you start doing a little research and you realize the ills behind it all. So.
Well, first of all, to caveat what you said, most of the time they don't answer unless they get 30 phone calls or 30 emails. So we need to stand up and use what our founding fathers said, the disquietude of the people. The time for being the silent majority is over. And we must use the disquietude of the people to make a little noise. The other thing, it seems more like, and I'm going to use a biblical analogy here, kind of like what Esau did when he sold his birthright for a bowl of beans. We're selling our birthright for a bowl of beans, and that's seems like what's going on today. And so, do we have any other questions?
I'd like to make a comment. A consolation prize for the people that want this park. Is anybody in here ever heard of Rock City? Yeah. Hold your hand up. That is a private organization that was built without any public money. And it's been a tourist attraction for decades. Now, to me, the consolation prize, instead of putting up $500,000 for a submission for something you don't know if you're going to get or not, would be to take that part of that money and put up billboards on Interstate 95 and Interstate 75 and run it like a business. If it's profitable, that's fine. But you don't have any outside influence and you control it. Now, to me, they can have their cake and eat it too if they just leave the UN out of it. All you got to do is advertise the thing. If it's as wonderful as they say it is, people will come. So and you talk about the politicians, this is the last place you will see a politician. So, you know, when you go talking to them about things that Alex explained, they think you're from outer space or some wacko. But anyway, I do see one politician back here that I know. Hold your hand up. That's Russ Goodman. That's Russ Goodman. Okay. Well, I'm not going to argue with you about that, but because you're my state senator. So anyway, I appreciate you being here.
Do we have any other representatives here? All right. Anybody else? Do we have any other questions? No. Questions only. Questions? Any questions?
I'd like to direct my question to the doctor. Do you fear for your safety coming against all these demons and devils you come up against?
Thank you for the question. I get asked that a lot, and there was a time where I had some concerns, and after coming to know the Lord, I realized, you know what, these evildoers aren't going to determine when I go home. God will, and so what's the point of being afraid of them?
Hopefully I asked this correctly here. So, Dr. Morty, this is directed for you. So I'm sure you're familiar as a journalist of Megan Basham's book that just came out, Shepherds for Sale.
About the corrupt pastors, yeah.
So first chapter is about climate change. There's a lot of mentions in there about the evangelical in America. Question is, wondering, have you run into that? What's your experience with that? One of the highly noted folks in there, because you mentioned the WEF. Rick Warren is a huge, big player in all of that. So just wanted to know what your experience with that is.
Sure. So the book that he referenced, it's I forget the name of it, and I have not read it yet, but it's exposing, I think it's something about bought and paid for shepherds. Shepherds for Sale, exactly. And as I understand it, it's exposing some of the leaders within the evangelical movement who are kind of selling out the church, selling out their congregations, selling out the Lord in exchange for money, power, prestige. And he mentioned Rick Warren. Not only is Rick Warren involved with the World Economic Forum, he's also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, which Arthur mentioned. Hillary Clinton, for some perspective, said that that's where, when she was Secretary of State, that's where she goes to be told what she should be doing and how she should be thinking about the future. So it's a very, very powerful organization. Rick Warren was just kicked out of the SBC, the Southern Baptist Convention, so that brought a big smile to my face. But there are, unfortunately, a lot of well-meaning pastors who I think haven't done the research that they should be doing on this. I mean, one of the jobs of a shepherd, of a pastor, is to protect the congregation from evil, from wickedness, from lies, etc. And UNESCO specializes in lies and evil and wickedness. So these are things that I think all pastors should be talking about. I'm encouraged by what I'm seeing in the church. I think there's a lot of pastors now starting to dig into this stuff, starting to recognize that what the Bible teaches about the nature of reality is true, starting to realize that the Bible applies to every area of life, that if we claim that Jesus is our Lord, he ought to be the Lord of every area of our life. We have a long way to go. I think a lot of pastors know better, but they're scared. In fact, I talk to a lot of pastors that know better and are scared. I'm going to South Carolina in a few days. And the pastor said, hey, I really want you to teach this stuff, but could we maybe not say this or that, because we have this and this, and we might get offended. And so there's a lot of timidity out there. But I'm encouraged by what's happening. By and large, I think COVID, even though I think the enemy meant that for evil, caused a huge awakening within the church. Wait, abortions are essential, weed stores are essential, and liquor shops are essential, but my church is not essential. So I think that made a lot of light bulbs go off. But for the pastors here, for the elders here, for the people involved in a congregation, this is, I think, something that we should be talking to our pastors about. They have a lot on their plate. They're dealing with family crises, and they don't have time necessarily to figure out everything going on with the UN. But so we should be there for them as a resource, pray for them, encourage them. Because this really is, like I said, close to the end, it's a spiritual battle. And Satan is very active, like a lion. He's seeking whom he may devour. And now is really the time for the pastors and the elders and the leaders of the church to stand up and sound the alarm, expose the evil works of darkness, and stand on the truth. So thanks for the question.
Just to piggyback a little bit on that, Trevor Loudon did a documentary called Enemies Within the Church. If you go to enemieswithinthechurch.com, he goes through that. He also discovered the Docet Group, which is a research organization for pastors to help them with research in the Bible. And so if you give them a little bit of money, they'll do the research for you to help you with your sermon preparation. If you give them a little bit more money, they'll give you a sermon outline. And if you give them a lot of money, the premium account, they'll give you a sermon manuscript. And so basically, if you're a lazy pastor and just want a manuscript to get up there and read in front of people, you can do that. But Trevor uncovered that the Docet Group, and by the way, you mentioned the SBC, J.D. Greer said he used it, and then there was the plagiarization scandal with that. But the Docet Group, he found that was linked to a para-organization that George Soros owns. And so they are preying on lazy pastors that don't want to write their own sermons. And so we really have to watch that and watch the wolves in sheep's clothing. I think we got, one or two more questions? One more? Okay.
And it's kind of along that same line. Our pastor's not afraid to speak up, by the way. And first of all, I want to thank Diane Cox and our chapter in Valdosta, our JBS group in Valdosta. We just showed a movie Sunday night, Disciples in the Moonlight. Are you familiar? It's based on the premise of what if the Bible were illegal? And I want to touch on that piece of your presentation where we have the new 10 Commandments. Is there any rumbling anywhere that we will see a kinder, gentler version of Scripture replacing more than just the 10 Commandments?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and it actually hits close to home. I've been outside of the United States almost my entire life, and most recently I lived in Sweden, which is a nice place. But in 2008, right around when I moved there, and I didn't go there on purpose. My wife is from there. I wouldn't have ended up there otherwise. Then they banned homeschooling, so we fled along with hundreds of other homeschool families. But in 2008, the Justice Ombudsman was given a request to investigate the Bible. The allegation was that the Bible was hate speech, that it was a violation of Swedish hate speech laws. So the Justice Ombudsman investigated the Bible. And he concluded, and he posted his findings on the internet, that the Bible is, in fact, a violation of Swedish hate speech laws. He did say, to his credit, it's probably not practical for us to ban this right now. You know, people might think we're like North Korea. So he did say we probably shouldn't ban it right now. But he said, if we were to change some of the language and remove some of those passages, then it wouldn't be a violation of the law anymore, so we ought to consider these options. Now, after we exposed that they took it down from the website, I think they were embarrassed, and they should have been incredibly embarrassed. But the reality is they were already arresting pastors for preaching. One of the famous cases, Pastor Okefenokee, a Pentecostal preacher, was thrown in jail for preaching against homosexuality. So they now have secret government agents that go into churches to spy on pastors' sermons. And if you say the wrong thing about marriage or gender or sexuality or whatever, you could find yourself behind bars. The same thing is happening in the United Kingdom. And we in America think, well, we have a First Amendment, so that'll never happen here. Well, I would point you to these things that are proliferating right now all across the country. They call them anti-conversion therapy laws. And the impression they want you to have is that there are somewhere evil Christians who are torturing children to make them stop being gay. And of course, that's not true. I've never heard of that actually happening, but that's what they want you to think. And the premise behind the law is that you are born a homosexual and therefore you are always a homosexual, or you are born a girl in a man's body or whatever, and so the only real solution is castration or a hysterectomy, a double mastectomy. And if you tell somebody that they don't have to be a homosexual, they don't have to be confused about their gender, that you could be happy just in the body that God gave you, or you could suppress those feelings that are sinful, and God can give you a heart of flesh and replace your heart of stone, that he can transform you, that you can be born again. All of that falls afoul of these conversion therapy laws. And in some of these jurisdictions, they are written to apply primarily to psychiatrists, psychologists, and psychotherapists. Not that it's any less of an assault on religious freedom, but in some jurisdictions, they specifically apply even to parents and to pastors. So how far of a stretch is it to say, well, you're preaching the gospel, you're telling people the good news, that they can be transformed, that they can have eternal life, that their old self can die and they can become a new creation? That's conversion therapy. So I don't believe we're as far from that kind of persecution if Christians don't wake up and say something and do something than many of us, I think, would like to believe we are. It's already happening in Europe. You know, Sweden, even recently, was a thoroughly Christian nation. In fact, it was an officially Christian nation until only about 12 years ago. They sent more missionaries around the world per capita than any country in the world. And today they're selling off their churches and turning them into mosques and throwing pastors in jail and teaching children horrific things. So we need to be aware that kind of stuff is coming. If you watch the DNC, which I don't recommend you do, you'll get that vibe. And so we need to stand firm on the Word of God, and this is something that we can't compromise on. It's, you know, Daniel chapter 3, memorize it. I will not bow down to your goofy golden idol. Throw me in the lion's den, throw me in the fiery furnace. It's not going to happen. Not going to stop praying, not going to bow down. And yeah, it is a real risk. It's a real threat, and I think Christians have an obligation to speak out on these things. So, thanks for the question.
This is for you guys. What can we do to help you guys out, getting the word out and being involved with you?
After we're through here, another gentleman is going to come up and give action plans that we can all engage in.
Okay. Any other questions?
Would flooding our government with petitions from this area, signed petitions by all the concerned people, would that help?
I don't know about help, but it wouldn't hurt. And in the process of it, that's like Charlton County passing that resolution. I don't know that it'll really do anything, but I thought it'd bring about awareness. And regardless, in the legislature next year, if they pass this around, I think it'll be a good discussion. Petition's good, talking to your neighbor's good. I think every bit of it. It's going to take all of it. When you don't know what to do, you do all of it. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to do all of it.
Went in the back. Where? There he is.
Hi, I'm Wilmer Davis. I just wanted to reiterate what the other gentleman said earlier, that $500,000 is a lot of money. And why don't the people that's pushing this simply skip the middleman and spend that money with an ad agency. Because all I heard at the last forum was jobs, 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 that this was going to bring jobs. We don't know how many jobs it's going to bring, but instead of getting involved with the United Nations, which we all know is bad news, just go to ad agency. You'll accomplish the same thing. Everybody will be happy.
I agree. And even back to the job thing, so the Conservation Fund did not pay to have the study done by an independent agency. They performed the economic impact study themselves. So whenever they talk about jobs too, yeah, I know it's hard to believe, but I asked them, I said, why didn't y'all hire a non-biased agency to perform this in a non-biased way? And they said, well, I guess it would have had a little more merit. But regardless, even the refuge manager, if you talk about the numbers, like say the number's 800, they're very creative. He'll say this. They're very creative in how they create that. So it's job impacts a lot of times. So if a person pulls through McDonald's and the bait store and, they could have 10 visits to the swamp per day. And, so it's job impacts a lot of time, not jobs created. So even the 800 jobs or whatever they, in the economic impact, they're not saying that there'll be 800 new jobs at hotels and McDonald's or wherever. They're saying that there'll be 800 job touches essentially. So again, they're very abstract. And they'll admit that. They'll say the people who do these studies are very creative. So, so in Folkestone, he said that. Can you tell him what you told us in Folkestone? He's a bee farmer. Tell him what you said about the bee and the smoke.
Well, my background, I've got a degree in biology and game management. So I was an environmentalist before there were any. But I told him, I said, I also raise bees, and let me tell you about bee farming. You smoke them good, and then you rob them. And I said, I've seen enough smoke here tonight for a good robbery. So, anyway, you just tell them to smoke you and then rob you.
All right, gentlemen, I think I'm going to interrupt real quick, and it's getting late, and we know people are having to leave. So how about this? Let's go ahead and finish out the program. And if you want to stick around for questions, we ain't got nowhere to be. But I know you do. So to respect your time, I would like to get on with our last 2 points of the agenda tonight. First, we're going to have a call to action plan. So if you are leaving anytime soon, do not leave without grabbing one of our signs for your front yard, okay? Or in front of your business or wherever you can put it. But at this time, I would like to welcome Miss Candace Taylor. She's probably going to be our future governor, so she's...
I'm going to be fast. I have an interview at 9 o'clock. So my papa was a bee farmer for 50 years. And he always said, he's been in heaven for 7, but he said, if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. And I'll tell you, I've been all over the state multiple times to every county, and we don't have a lot of politicians in South Georgia. And I didn't understand why. Everybody cares about Atlanta. Atlanta thinks they run this state. They know nothing about us. And I go up there and start talking, and then they're like, well, I kind of believe like you. You just talk different. I'm like, yeah, I believe in Jesus, guns, and babies. So, but North Georgia believes like we do too. They really do. And they're a lot more involved in politics because, see, Atlanta's liberalism tries to invade their counties. And I sat there and I thought, Lord, what do you want me to say? I came over here, all the way here. What do you want me to say? So this is what I believe the Lord's saying. We're different in South Georgia because we want to be left alone. We want to be left alone. And Okefenokee Swamp belongs to us. It belongs to we, the people. I've been going there since I was a little girl. I don't really like gators. I like bulldogs. In fact, when that kid died in Orlando at Disney World, it terrified me. Because I've seen alligators in ponds that my family owns, and they are scary things. They will drown you. They will hide you in a den and let you rot, and then they eat you later. But I want them to leave the alligators alone in the Okefenokee. There are Native Americans that their lives were ripped from them that are buried there. I don't want anybody messing with those graves. There's no honor in that. There's a lot of reasons we could go through, and I'm sure this gentleman up here can tell you more than I can sitting here. Those are just the things that I think about. In fact, the first district passed a resolution that Ms. Deborah Giddens, Ware County GOP chair, presented almost a year ago. In District 14, where Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene lives, my fellow counterpart, Denise Burns, she passed it the next day. And several other districts passed it. We have 14 districts in Georgia. They'd all pass it because they stand with us. We do not want any foreign country coming to the greatest country in the world and having dominion over us. And so this is how this works. We're a bottom-up government. We are. Somebody said that. We are. We the people run the show. And so we'll have a call to action, but I just want to say that being quiet about it is not going to work. It's not going to work. In fact, I did a little show called Jesus, Guns, and Babies. I had an interview last week on, and I made Newsweek yesterday. #1 article, it says, Republican chair says only Christians should be elected to government. Amen. Well, I really... MSN 7 hours ago said, I don't have to honor your religion. Republican chair declares only Christians should be elected. I was really saying, this is what I was saying. I was saying we as Christians should elect Christians. And if we elect Christians to every seat, God would run our country again. That's what I was saying. But you know what? This nation was founded on Jesus Christ. We shouldn't allow witchcraft here. We shouldn't allow occultism here. The DNC is an example of it right now. I was the biggest Taylor Swift fan you ever seen, but when she started doing witchcraft stuff on stage, I cut her off. We can't accept it, not even a little bit. Not even an inch. And I'm a public school educator, and I catch a lot of heat, and people that are on the liberal left wanting me fired because of my First Amendment right, but I'm not going to give it up. I'm going to speak the truth. If they want to fire me, I'll be a multimillionaire because the Constitution says I can say what I want to say as long as it's the truth. And the truth is there's no separation of church and state. That's the truth, okay? The church runs the state. We are the church. The state can't tell us what to do. We tell them what to do. And we elect good men like Senator Goodman, like Representative Meeks in the back. We elect them to go as our public servants to take what we want and put it into law. That's how the government works. And so I'm going to tell you, any politician, and I'm ending with this. I have a PhD, and my dissertation was on suicide. I'm an expert in suicide. Any politician that supports this and pushes this will commit political suicide. They can quote me on that because I have a loud mouth and I don't lie. And I will tell everybody who will listen, I will dig in your past and I will bring out every crooked deal you've done. You better not support it. We're not giving up the swamp. I love y'all. If you need me, call me. And I'll see you soon.
All right, at this time, we would like to have Joshua Leach come up, and he's got a call to action plan. So to answer your question, sir, this is what you can do on your way out the door. All right.
Thank you, everybody. The first thing that I would like to say, well, let me start with this. All of you that are representatives here, thank you for coming. Thank you. We have asked that the Okefenokee Swamp Park Board of Trustees come here. Every organizer, I believe, of this event went to the event that was for this World Heritage designation. We are looking for all the facts. We personally, actually, Mr. Jake Strickland, very eloquently invited all of them to come tonight. And maybe some of them have come since the beginning. I believe at the beginning we asked if any had come, and I didn't see anybody. We sincerely thank you if you have come. Can you please stand up or wave your hand if you came and you're from the Okefenokee Swamp Park Board of Trustees? That says a lot to me. I don't see any hands. So one of your calls to action, please take one of these little papers. On the back, it says call to action. And we have all that we could get of the contact information of our local Okefenokee Swamp Park Board of Trustees. If we can stop this thing in our own backyard with these board members, I believe we can stop it. If it goes up to the federal government and then goes to UNESCO, God can still stop it. And God can stop it here. It's going to take God no matter what. Well, let me start with this. Our call to action today, I'm so thankful for the focus on God Almighty tonight. Our call to action is to humble ourselves, to pray, to seek God's face, and turn from our wicked ways. We can have this great event. We can call every representative. But if we have wickedness in our own hearts, God is not going to bless it. Please hear me. Turn from our wicked ways. Seek the Lord. Humble ourselves and pray. That's number one. Nothing else will be effective. Number two, please, please, please help us contact these, I believe there's 13 board members on our local Okefenokee Swamp Park Board of Trustees. We need them to hear from us. I suspect that we don't have all of their contact information, even though we have tried, because there may be some of them that are sensible, and that if they hear what we've heard tonight, if they hear some of these facts, they will change their mind and stop this thing. Right now, I believe they are only hearing from the side that is for this designation. So please, please, please contact Dr. Clark and ask for all of the other contact information. And if you find it, please call these numbers at the bottom and let us know so that we can get it out to everyone else. That's number one. Number two, Buddy Carter, John Ossoff, and Raphael Warnock. Please flood them with emails. Someone said tonight that if you had 30 phone calls or emails that you could get an action. Right now, it will take us 2 minutes. I ask that all these emails that we put on the back of this thing, before you leave tonight, send them an email just simply telling them we are against the designation as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. That will speak volumes. Please email all these people on the back of this list. Some of these people are here tonight, and I'm so thankful for Russ Goodman, our state senator, and Stephen Meeks, our state representative. I'm thankful for all of the others, the chairman of the 1st District, the chairman of the Ware County GOP, all of you representatives that are here, thank you for coming. And everyone else here, talk to them. Talk to them tonight if they will let you. I know they're tired, but please get to them and make sure they heard what we just saw tonight. There is no excuse. If they are still for this thing, there is no excuse. Please talk to them and make sure they understood. This was a huge presentation with so much information that there's no way that we can all remember it. This was live streamed on the Americans for the Okefenokee Facebook page. So another call to action is for you to go to the Facebook Americans for the Okefenokee Facebook page and share and rewatch this video presentation. Alex Newman, God has blessed him with so much information. He has followed the UN for decades, and there was so much information here. Take it point by point so that you can share with your neighbors. I know I'm forgetting something. There was so much on here for us to do. Let me point out again the signs. There are signs back here. We've had several people who had to leave early, and they asked how much the signs are for them to take. They are free. Please take one of the signs that Jake Strickland is holding up in the back. They are free. Put them up in your businesses and in your properties. You've probably seen them around. It's already so evident that the community is against this thing. It was pointed out that 78%, 2,400 Ware County Republican voters voted against this designation, and only approximately 700 voted for it. That's 78% of Ware County Republican voters, 2,400 people. If I'm not mistaken, there was more consolidation against the UNESCO World Heritage Site designation on those questionnaires for the Ware County Republican Party than any other question. All the other questions had less than 78% agreeance. So the community is more agreed against this thing than any of the other questions that were on that ballot. The community is against this. There's no excuse for them to continue. And I'm talking about the Okefenokee Swamp Park Board of Trustees. I believe that they are where we need to start to stop this thing. Please also email Michael Lusk and Kim Bednark, I believe is how you say it. On the back of your handout, there is a typo. So right now, everybody look on the back of your handout. Kim's email has a G for her last name. It should be a B. Please change that before you email. Yes, Kim Bednarek. Thank you. Tell me how to say it so I don't insult her. Bednarek. One of those pronunciations. Please change her email from kim.g and the rest of the last name to kim.b. Thank you all for coming. I don't know about you, but I've been encouraged tonight in the Lord. And that's my prayer as we leave, that we will give God glory for this miracle of bringing Alex Newman here, bringing the John Birch Society here, and bringing all of our representatives who have stood up against this thing here. God deserves some glory, so please give him glory as you leave tonight. And thank you so much. Yes, sir. Yes. Let us close in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you, Lord, for the miracle that you have done in the hearts and in the minds of so many people in our communities. We have seen people stand up and declare glory to you in so many ways, and we have seen that tonight for sure. And I pray, Lord, that you will bless us with your strength, with your wisdom, as we pursue stopping this evil agenda from having any kind of stamp of approval. We don't want the stamp of the enemy, even if it was just a designation stamp. We don't want the stamp of the enemy on our local community. Please, Lord, help us as we try to honor you and stop this evil from coming into our community. Please help all of us to have the truth, help us to learn more truth, and help us to teach those that need to hear it the truth of what is going on. Please stop the lies. Please help all of our community to see through deception, and help those, Lord, that I believe are truly just deceived, those that don't understand what's really going on. Please, Lord, help us to, in love and in the Spirit of God, open eyes to what's really going on. I thank you, Lord, for all of these that are here, and I pray, Lord, that you will be glorified in all that we do. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.